Good afternoon, everybody. I'm not going to speak to you about applied fluid dynamics. I confess, a little out of my depth there from time to time. It's great to be here. It's good to see Linda Greenhouse, who represents the finest of what we do at the New York Times and have done. I'd like to thank Annie Westcott and Catherine Wong, who got me here from Paris. And it's a great honor for me, particularly as a naturalized American who swore the oath of allegiance just 17 years ago, to speak before the oldest learned society in the United States. If America freed me, and it did, I can only hold that liberty most precious, and my oath to a nation of laws most sacred. For once lost, as I've learned in wars and repressive societies across the world, freedom is not easily recovered. In founding the American Philosophical Society in 1743, Benjamin Franklin sought to promote useful knowledge. That can only be done in a forum such as this one, where the free exchange of ideas is prized. The mark of any healthy society is its capacity for civilized disagreement and reasonable compromise in the public interest. This notion, encapsulated in Voltaire's vow to defend to the death the right to express views he detested, faces a crisis in our days of absolutist bombast and sensitivities so exquisite they cannot abide challenge. Beset by social media, bereft of any shared notion of truth, consumed by often irrational fears, polarized into rival, self-absorbed tribes, rattled by the pandemic, isolated by remote work, Americans often seem to me to have lost the capacity to listen to one another. This is ominous, because perhaps the only way to persuade anyone of anything is to listen hard. Our times feel dangerous, ladies and gentlemen, more so than at any other time in my life, and not just because the other shoe dropped this week when missiles of still indeterminate origin hit Poland, a NATO member, or because talk of nuclear war is no longer fantastical. This has been the age of undoing, of world order, of international law, of the ozone layer, of peace, and most perilously, of truth. A republic, if you can keep it, said Franklin, asked in this very city what form of governance the Constitutional Convention of 1787 had adopted. He was aware of the dangers besetting a creation so bold. No wonder that he prized knowledge, whose foundation is facts, as a buttress of the nascent nation. For there is no environment more susceptible to the strongman's promise than disorientation. There is no surer prologue to dictatorship than the destruction of truth. Without a concept of truth, there are no facts. And without facts, there is no science or law, only the whirling of conspiracies that sweep people away like moths drawn to an orange flame. I choose the word orange advisedly. As Robert Musil, the Austrian author of The Man Without Qualities, observed, no culture can rest on a crooked relationship to truth. That was in 1935, 4 years before Europe committed collective suicide for the second time in a quarter century, dragging the world down with it. The United States came uncomfortably close to such a precipice on January 6, 2021. Yet, as we meet here, the former president behind the assault on the Congress and on the peaceful transition of power, the very essence of democracy, the man who made 30,573 false or misleading claims, at least according to that other newspaper down in Washington, during his time in office, has just declared his presidential candidacy again. Even if he looks diminished by the November surprise, tens of millions of Americans still find Trump redux plausible, even seductive. They call his defeat in 2020 the big lie. When words cease to have meaning, anything is possible. The only possible conclusion is that truth is of no concern to Trump supporters, or that truth has a different meaning to them, one detached from empirical inquiry, a truth that consists of telling it like it is. That would be telling it like politically correct, gender 360, Subaru driving, cosmopolitan, globalized liberals refuse to do, because, of course, in their eyes, those people control the world and get rich by doing so. Another president of a great power, whom I will name in full, Vladimir V. Putin of Russia, went to war this year against Ukraine, a neighboring country he dismissed as a fictive nation, fit only for obliteration, followed by absorption into the Russian motherland. Russia, you see, was not quite big enough, even though it extends over 11 time zones. He vowed to denazify Ukraine, a country led by a Jew. This was something new under the sun. It was also Exhibit A in what John le Carre once called the classic, timeless, all-Russian, barefaced, whopping lie, one for which tens of thousands of young lives have already been sacrificed since February 24. Truth is dangerous, but its suppression much more so. I learned during the Bosnian War, a formative experience of my life, how explosive the fuse of suppressed memory is. Tito had cancelled the truths of the savage breakup of Yugoslavia during World War II in order to impose his communist rule. But when that system fell apart at Cold War's end, I was witness to the way old hatreds resurfaced, as if only dating from yesterday, and left more than 100,000 dead in Yugoslavia's destruction between 1992 and 1995. Fritz Stern, the great historian of post-war Germany, once wrote that he was born in the Germany of 1926 into a world on the cusp of avoidable disaster. For Stern, the fragility of freedom was the simplest and deepest lesson of my life and work. I do fear these days sometimes that we are sleepwalking toward some terrible catastrophe. It is far too easy to forget Stern's hard-earned lesson. He knew 5 Germanys: Weimar, Third Reich, West Germany, East Germany, and the Unified Federal Republic in the space of one lifetime. The road to the resolution of the German question was long and hard, and it happened only through transparency and truth. Covering Germany in the late 1990s, I was always struck by how many government buildings were made of glass, deliberately so that you could see in and those inside could see out. Well, how did the violent instability of today and the threats to democracy come about? Did we not stand at Cold War's end, just a little over 3 decades ago, at the cusp of a world where the only rational assumption was that Western liberal democracy would spread because demonstrably superior to any other system in the delivery of freedom, peace, and prosperity? We did. And then, to borrow the title of a Joseph Heller novel, not his most famous, something happened. I cannot rehearse here the full inversion. But allow me to say at the outset that in our smug confidence, we underestimated hatred, which is well described by the Polish Nobel laureate Wisława Szymborska in her eponymous poem. How easily it vaults the tallest obstacles, how rapidly it pounces, tracks us down. Hatred, its face twisted in a grimace of erotic ecstasy. Since when does brotherhood draw crowds, she writes? Has compassion ever finished first? People say hatred is blind. No, retorts Szymborska, it has a sniper's keen sight and gazes unflinchingly at the future as only it can. The ghosts of repetition that haunt history do not go quietly, in my experience. Hatred is an elixir, a potent political bomb, a seductive answer to the unbearable banality of life. It ushers the lone individual into a consoling tribe. It brings to tired faces a rictus of arousal at the sight of the savior. Szymborska was right. The eros of hatred is potent. It is always available to the nationalist demagogue, ready to identify scapegoats, promise vengeance, trample truth, and whip a pliant populace into a baying frenzy. I saw that in Belgrade in the early 1990s. It's because hatred exists in the human heart that we have conceived societies of law to contain it. But why did blow-up-the-system hatred stir? The kind that brought a flim-flam merchant to the Oval Office, a normally prudent nation, Britain, to the disastrous leap in the dark that was Brexit, and war to the continent whose unity and peace seemed attained at last with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Well, the United States has lived almost a quarter century of trauma. America, the hyperpower, evaporated with the devastation of 9/11. The sanctuary of sea to shining sea was no more. Demoralizing wars without victory in Afghanistan and Iraq followed. Warriors, brave warriors, trooped home, bearing their wounds, and nobody cared. They found other Americans busy shopping. Along came the Great Recession of 2008, with its impunity for the financiers who had developed the notion that debt was desirable, leverage lovely, greed great. The impact of globalization was felt deep in America. While the new masters of the knowledge economy profited exponentially, Americans living on stagnant wages across a wide swathe of the country experienced precariousness and fast-growing income inequality. They felt invisible. They felt marginalized. America is about a fair shake for all, until it was no longer. All this was accompanied by the growing threat to the planet of global warming and the relentless technology-driven transference of life to an online borderless world, where the winner was the super-educated Homo technologicus, and the losers were Joe's six-pack, truth, and downtime. This buffeting unsettled Americans who were also grappling with hardening conflict over race, gender, guns, abortion, identity politics, and even the date of the country's founding, differences that turned the cultural gap between metropole and heartland into a chasm and appeared at times to leave American democracy, which involves conversations across such chasms, hanging by a thread. To varying degrees, such economic and cultural chasms between the wired beneficiaries of globalization and its losers opened up all over the West. In France, where I live, the losers live in what is called la périphérie, the periphery. Viewed from the periphery, what might the winner's truth look like? It might look like a series of interlocking beliefs and convictions, whether about immigration or police violence or race or gender or you name it, that formed a self-serving system hiding its radical nature behind bland expression, feeding on contempt for the deplorable uninitiated to the club of the affluent, lacking any real curiosity about the nature of blighted lives, and enjoying an unimaginable accumulation of wealth. It might perhaps have looked that way. Hence, the peripheries, or the heartlands, fury at experts, its willingness to take a leap in the dark, and its readiness to embrace truth without facts from the mouth of supposed saviors, saying once unthinkable things like portraying Mexican immigrants as rapists. Steve Bannon understood this. Boris Johnson understood this. Vladimir Putin, in his cultural war against the West, understood this. The whole anti-Western, anti-colonial tide we are witnessing from Africa and other parts of the global South owes something to the conviction that others' facts are crafted to benefit them. So why not go right ahead and create a different set of facts, perhaps with the help of Russia's murderous Wagner Group? All of this amounts, I think, to a perilous brew. We must rebuild the commons. We must return to the idea of a fair shake for all. We must accept that democracies cannot function when the wealthiest pay tax at a lower rate than a factory worker. We must remember that nobody's mind was ever changed by being made to feel stupid. We must protect America's great gift, its breezy individualism, against the cancer of devouring self-indulgence. We must listen. We must educate, for equal opportunity is imperative, even if we accept that equal outcomes will not follow. We must relearn the meaning of compromise, because in life you don't get 100% of what you want. You're doing okay if you get 70%. We must reaffirm the aspirational American ascension at the core of the country's dream, too often supplanted by American alienation. We must work hard and patiently to restore the idea that truth matters and that the purveyors of xenophobic nationalist illusion are taking humanity on a well-traveled road to cataclysm. We must understand that rebuilding the idea of truth involves people living truths like access to a decent education and healthcare that are more widely shared. I'm a journalist. To be alone on deadline is the journalist's lot, facing the many-faceted world and seeking the means to render it as closely as possible, knowing that something in the quiver of life is always ineffable and will slip through the cracks. In the face of the ominous developments I've described, we must answer not with something new, but something constant. Bear witness, speak truth to power, go out across this small, threatened planet to find the facts and tell the stories that may occasionally make a difference. Whether filed by telex, as I started out doing in war-torn Beirut in the early 1980s, or by smartphone, or one day by some beaming from cerebral neuron to cerebral neuron, the discomforting truths that must be told are only found by looking into strangers' eyes. Patience. It may take time to understand. Listen, touch, smell, feel. The subject will reveal itself to you if you restrain the impulse to impose it. The story must build from the inside out, like the butterfly from the chrysalis with a slow unfolding of wings. Writing begins where the anecdotal stops. Writing dies where the preconceived prevails. Writing is the painful stripping out of the non-essential. It is impossible, ladies and gentlemen, to bear witness from digital distance, removed from the mire, the tears, the sediment in the syrupy coffee. No search engine gives you the stench of a crime, the tremor in the air, the eyes that smolder, or the cadence of a scream. No miracle of technology renders the lip-drying taste of fear. No algorithm captures the hush of dignity or the adrenaline rush of coalescing courage. These things must be seen to be felt. For a writer, it's all material. You inhabit the world, you keep a distance as an onlooker and note-taker. You are within and you are without. You write it down to see how words may change over time, like peonies changing color as they fade. Journalists seek stubborn facts, the kind that may bring down governments or save the life of a man wrongly on death row. And I see that Bernard Arnault is here somewhere, who saved Doyle Ham from execution in Alabama. I do see Bernard there. Or, at last, by seeking those facts, usher murderous tyrants like Putin to judgment. Facts are the essential ballast of decency. As the Polish poet Czesław Miłosz has written, do not feel safe. The poet remembers, you may kill him, another will be born. Deeds and words shall be recorded. Journalists, remember, record the trail of barbarism, set down the torture, that the perpetrators may not efface the crimes. Working from a core of pain and melancholy, it's not surprising that I sought out these same emotions in refugee camps, in war zones, at remote borders, in the shanties and the shebeens, at the face of a South African gold reef 1 mile down, in Chengdu, where a Chinese woman crushed by the state had self-immolated, among the displaced and the exploited and the terrified. That was my place, that my debt. Take me home, the outcasts whispered, you who have none. And so I tried to tell their stories. Objectivity is a fine word, a fine journalistic aspiration even, but it's a dead word, freighted with too many syllables, and we are human. Fairness is a more reasonable aspiration. We bring to what we write our unique sensibilities, our rawness, our sisters and brothers, our convictions. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we are in an existential battle for truth, the rule of law and liberty. There should be no illusions about this, which is to say, our precious republic and others like it around the world. Fake news, alternative facts, fact-based journalism, horrible expression, as if there's any other kind, are the phrases of an era in which velocity trumps veracity. Down the rabbit hole of 2 + 2 = 5 lies dystopia. As the British historian Simon Schama has pointed out, it is indifference to the distinction between truth and falsehoods that lays the groundwork for despotism. Very powerful people today, like Elon Musk, the new owner of Twitter, Tucker Carlson, Kanye West, traffic in preposterous conspiracy theories. In the disorienting cacophony of social media, when Monday's outrage cannot be recalled because Friday's has already supplanted it, indifference spreads. Hence, for all of us, the imperative to be vigilant. Allow me to circle back, in conclusion, to the importance of institutions like the American Philosophical Society, dedicated to the idea that freedom and truth are served by open debate. If conformity wins, democracy dies. If there's only one correct way to view a question, every deviant from that correctness risks being cancelled. This is the death of thought. It could also be the death of journalism as an exercise in open inquiry. A battle has been joined over what constitutes journalistic integrity. Wesley Lowery, a black journalist who left the Washington Post after a clash with its former editor, has said that, quote, American view from nowhere, objectivity-obsessed, both sides journalism is a failed experiment. We need to rebuild our industry as one that operates from a place of moral clarity. A place of moral clarity sounds enticing. I can see what Lowery is driving at, especially in newsrooms where the racial balance leaves much to be desired. But it can easily translate into holding there is only one legitimate way to think. A stifling culture insistent on conformity with that moral clarity instills more fear than justice. It freights with tendentious convictions sentences that should be allowed to speak for themselves. Good journalism, essential to the health of our democracy, cannot survive in an atmosphere when everyone is looking over their shoulder, worrying about whether they have trespassed against the new moral order. Journalism depends on vigorous freedom for ideas, even bad ones, and acceptance of the fact that less of life transpires in the light of absolute truth than in the shadow of troubling complexity. Halftones interest me more than primary colors. Van Gogh's flowers are always wilting slightly. His lilies have turned from pink to purple and a little brownish on the edges. The artist is interested in the beauty of the equipoise between life and death. And isn't that where we are all situated without paying much attention to it? Van Gogh is less taken by perfection than decay. Ours, however, is too often a culture of perfection, of all or nothing, of primary colors and primal screams, of presumption of guilt, of unforgiving trial by the mob, proud in its refusal to compromise. And so it's broken. Let's fix it. Let's respect the complexity and the nuances of truth. As Isaiah Berlin wrote in The Crooked Timber of Humanity, no perfect solution is, not merely in practice, but in principle, possible in human affairs, and any determined attempt to produce it is likely to lead to suffering, disillusionment, and failure. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, a war is being fought in Europe. A war is being fought in the middle of Europe against Vladimir Putin's empire of lies. It cannot be lost, or the values we hold dear may die. A battle has been joined within our democracies to save them from Putin-like autocracies, where contempt for the truth, manipulation of the truth, the ruthless exploitation of mendacity serves power, but does not serve the people. Across the world, open, accountable systems based on the rule of law and the defense of human rights confront the law of the jungle. This struggle, too, must be won if human dignity is to be salvaged. Life, said Macbeth, is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Yet we cannot succumb to resignation. I am a South African. Both my parents were born in Johannesburg, and I know in my bones that the worst is not inevitable, that statesmanship, such as that shown by Mandela and de Klerk, can make a difference. There can be November surprises. I like Camus' idea of active fatalism. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. In his letter from a region of my mind, James Baldwin wrote, "It seems to me that we ought to rejoice in the fact of death, or to decide indeed to earn one's death by confronting with passion the conundrum of life. It is the small beacon in that terrifying darkness from which we came and to which we shall return." The American Philosophical Society, standing just a block from the Liberty Bell, strikes me as one such small beacon. It is of the nature of bells that they crack, but as Leonard Cohen noted, that's how the light gets in. And liberty for all the inhabitants thereof must mean, in the end, finally, after so much struggle, just that. As I learned long ago in South Africa, disaster is avoidable if truth is upheld and the intrinsic value of every human being recognized. The words of W.H. Auden in 1939, on the eve of a world war that would take tens of millions of lives, should be read today in every classroom across our small, vulnerable, warming planet. Defenseless under the night, our world in stupor lies, yet dotted everywhere, ironic points of light flash out wherever the just exchange their messages. May I, composed like them of eros and dust, beleaguered by the same negation and despair, show an affirming flame. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
I know Roger will be ready to entertain all questions. Annie and Nora have the microphones.
Yeah, Rich here from Indiana. When you say we must, the we in this room are, of course, completely on your side.
Sorry, where am I? Okay,
Oh,
yeah,
wait,
hi, yeah.
in the back.
The we in this room are completely on your side. How do you convince the very many people around the world and in this country who believe an alternative reality that they must?
Well, I tried to get at that when I spoke about the need to try to rebuild the commons. I think that, let's say we in this room, or I mean, I don't know if all of us, but broadly speaking, are on this side. I do think that there have been conspicuous failings on our part in terms of trying to understand, in terms of respecting the fact that others who hold radically different views, but radically different views, may well be just as intelligent as we are. They simply think differently and view the world differently. And a lack of curiosity. I felt when I was covering, as a columnist, the 2016 election, and I went down to Kentucky, and it was like stepping through the looking glass. I mean, on every contentious issue, be it immigration, police violence toward blacks, the views were simply, it was like being a foreign correspondent in my own country. I felt like a foreign correspondent. And the people who were going to vote for Trump at that time, they had no illusions whatsoever about it. They knew he was a lowlife. They knew that he was a rogue, a flim-flam merchant, as I put it, and that possibly he could take the country toward complete disaster. But they had reached such a point of exasperation that they were ready to blow up the system, as the British, and normally prudent people, were in opting for Brexit after the European Union had brought them extraordinary prosperity over the previous 4 decades. I mean, I saw that change in Britain. So I think clearly an effort has to be made on both sides to speak and listen hard, and I think one of the things that has divided this country most harshly is rapidly growing inequality, and the very poor state of schools and healthcare in many areas of the country. And I think if there's to be a fair shake for everyone, then it must mean something. And if people feel more satisfied with their lives and more convinced that the United States is a society where fairness means something, then I think communication becomes easier. Look, it's going to be very difficult. It's a problem that is not only present in the United States. I think some progress has been made under President Biden. And it was interesting what happened a few days ago in the election. I mean, people did not want to go down, some loony road. Many millions of Americans, refused Donald Trump's exhortations to back frankly crazy candidates. So I think there might be a bit of a shift, but it's not easy. It's important to get out there, talk to people.
Yes.
Thank you very much for a very stimulating talk. I've been writing on this precise issue for many years. I have a book called The Virtues of Mendacity on Lying in Politics, so I have a great deal to say in response, but let me just confine myself to 2 big points. One, it seems to me that the realm of politics, and journalism aside, it's a very different realm, is a realm in which the truth plays a role but not the predominant role. Politics is a realm of values. It's a normative as well as cognitive realm, a realm of opinion, a realm of rhetoric, a realm of desire and interest, a realm also that involves promises about the future, which have, of course, very little truth-telling, let's say, standardization. The future is something we cannot tell the truth about. So that it seems to me, as Hannah Arendt famously said, truth is monologic, whereas politics is pluralogical or pluralist. And you, in a way, at the end of your talk, came to that very point. So I would argue against a simple affirmation of truth-telling as the norm of political, let's say, salvation, that there is a role for all of these other dimensions in the political realm besides the truth. Secondly, on the question of Trump's popularity. You point to this yourself, but I would press it even further. One of the things that made him so extraordinarily popular to people unlike us was the fact that he was perceived as a truth teller.
Telling it like it is.
As someone who cut through the crap, as someone who, as you say, told it like it was. And on occasion, he did. When he was going against those 17 other Republican nominees, he was the one, in a way, who was destroying the myth that they were on the side of the small man and woman, that they were on the side of the
And Trump
victims.
was?
Well, no, you don't have to tell the entire truth, but he was telling the truth. And that's the point about politics.
As long as we clarify that.
No. The point about politics is you don't tell the whole truth. So, but he was telling, and they took him as someone representing their interests. Now, you and I could say, no, they were fooled, they were dupes, they were deplorably, ignorant. We could condescend to them. But there was, when he said, for example, that, America also has killed people. Remember that moment when,
Yeah, with Putin, yeah.
Well, he was telling a kind of ugly truth that the, let's say, whitewashing of American politics very rarely admits. So there is this weird capacity in Trump to be a bold-faced liar. We see him as a con man. Most people perhaps do, and others perhaps excuse the con man quality. But his ability somehow to represent telling the truth was part of his appeal. So in a way, my point about always relying on the truth as a norm comes up against the fact that from the point of view of his supporters, he was in fact the truth teller. And we were the ones who
I tried to say that.
So I agree with. So what I'm saying, that nuance.
But but it was a different understanding of truth. It was
it
was not empirical truth. It was telling it like it is. Whatever that means. Look, I think, when Trump says that and gets millions of Americans to say that the 2020 election was stolen, that he did not really lose the election. Look, this is a podium, this is a podium. So, not one single shred of evidence has ever been produced to buttress that allegation. So, it's a lie. It's a lie. And that's what I think we have to be very clear with Trump. He regularly says things that are false, and people accept that because they think it's part of his refusal to be politically correct, to be frank, to say things that are unsayable to others. And but it's dangerous. It's dangerous. Look, he wanted to subvert the election. He wanted to prevent the peaceful transition of power in this country. He came pretty close, and I don't think, there's a sort of I see it in France. There's this sort of fascination with Trump. There's this, they're almost mesmerized. They think that even the November results, he'll somehow, no. I think it was a serious blow to him, and I think the majority of Americans, in the end, my perception anyway of them is that they are sensible people. Most of them, and they've seen now where Trump can take us. So, I personally do not think we're going to see Trump redux, but it's just my view. Yeah.
Someone has the microphone, yes. And if you could introduce yourself, that'd be wonderful.
Sure. Yeah,
Say
I'm
your
Deb
name.
Niemeyer, and I'm very nervous with this question. I just entered this us, and so please forgive the shaky voice. When I listened to your talk, and thank you very much, I found two themes, and I'm curious about your thoughts about the two themes as I would characterize them. One is a general distaste, even alarm, over what I would call Trump's lies and the lies of politicians and others, even in the public eye today. But a second theme, which is a discomfort with wokeness or maybe moral clarity. And I think of those two things very differently, and I wondered if you meant to equate them in kind of the way you did in your talk.
No, I didn't mean to equate them. I think what's dangerous in society is the loss of some shared view of what is a truthful statement and what is not a truthful statement. I think once people are hypnotized, be it by Putin or be it by Trump or be it by Boris Johnson, and they're not all on the same level, Marine Le Pen in France, that can be very dangerous. The point I was trying to make about wokeness and the alienation that a lot of Americans feel from that goes back to my point about getting out and trying to understand the way a lot of the country may view these developments, some of which are quite radical in their way. So I think it's important to realize that it's not just a slam dunk that culturally this is going to be easily acceptable to a lot of Americans, the woke view of the world. So the only point I was trying to make there was of the necessity of not believing that one has a monopoly on the truth, or on the right way to live. So because I think people tend these days, and it's partly social media, because anybody can declaim at any moment what they believe. A lot of the woke movement has produced a lot of changes in society that I applaud and that are very important. But I think at the same time it's important to recognize that for some people, some of the aspects may not be easy to grasp or empathize with.
I think we have some questions in
Yeah.
Ambassador.
Yes,
Ambassador.
yes, I'm Jack Matlock. Is the mic on? Yes. Okay. Yes, I certainly agree with your overall conclusion that we are in a very dangerous situation, and that the lack of truth is at the basis of much of it. I would say that your analysis of the international situation leaves a good bit of context out. I would remind people that one of the eminent members of this society, George Kennan, agreed with me and others in the 1990s when we warned against expanding NATO and the reaction that is Russia was apt to have to that. And also those of us who opposed withdrawing from the arms control agreements, which we negotiated over decades to end the Cold War. This happened wrong. And yes, it is terrible for one country to invade another. Russia is not the first to do it since the end of the Cold War. The United States invaded Iraq, which had not attacked it, was not a threat to it, and with citing lies in order to do so. We have not set an example of a rule-based world order that we now want. That doesn't excuse what's happening in Ukraine, but simply to blame everything on Vladimir Putin, when U.S. policy did a lot to form his reactions, I think omits from our discussion a very important element. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that, Ambassador. I mean, the idea that Russia has been cornered or threatened. Look, the invitation in 2008 in Romania to Ukraine to join NATO was a terrible mistake. I mean, it was not serious. And nothing happened from 2008 onward. There was never any serious intent to bring Ukraine into NATO, and so it was a provocation without any corresponding benefit. It was certainly a mistake. I disagree with you about NATO expansion. This is a case where civilized disagreement on an important matter is very understandable. 100 million Central Europeans were liberated from the Soviet totalitarian yoke with the fall of the Berlin Wall. they did not want to go back inside it. Who's to say what might have happened to Estonia or Lithuania or Latvia today if they were not members of NATO? Might they have been gobbled up too? Adam Michnik, my good friend in Warsaw, was very clear. What do we want? We want to be normal. We want to be free. We want to have the possibility to grow and develop, and Poland has. And I think the interlocking NATO and European Union membership for all these countries of Central Europe have been extremely important. Now, you could argue about what might have happened if Ukraine had become a member of NATO. I think that would have been a step too far, and that's the reason why it did not happen. And we failed to work out any arrangement for the in-between countries like Georgia, like Ukraine, like Moldova, and so set the stage for this. But Vladimir Putin, who's been in power now I interviewed Putin in 2003 in Moscow, in his dacha. And at that point in time, it seemed to me that he was divided. He was a Petersburg man, and Petersburg looks to the West probably more than any other city in Russia. And he realized the need to bring an open economy to Russia, and part of him wanted to open up to the West and find some kind of arrangement with NATO. And part of him was KGB man, FSB man, who wanted to control the media. And then as soon as the stirrings began in Georgia and Ukraine, and he went on a steady march toward the absolute obsession that he has today with the breakup of the Soviet Empire. Well, he wants to restore the Soviet Empire. Yeah. I mean, if you're in Ukraine and you look at Minsk and you look at Warsaw, are you going to choose Minsk? No, sir. You're not going to choose Minsk. You're going to choose Warsaw, let alone Berlin or Paris. Russia has no right that I see to rule or invade Ukraine. It's been a complete disaster, and a disaster, I think, also for Putin. As for Iraq, yes, you described it accurately. And it's not, we can mention Abu Ghraib, we can mention Guantanamo. The world is divided between people who think the United States is a force for the good in the world and people who don't. I believe the United States is a force for good in the world. Do we make mistakes? Yes. Do we make terrible mistakes? Yes. Iraq was one. Are we the same as Putin's Russia? No, we are not. And I think one has to make that distinction. It's important also for the United States to recognize the mistakes it's made, because part of what makes half of Africa today in the United Nations vote, either abstain or reject the motions condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine or the Russian annexation, is this perception of hypocrisy, which you rightly pointed out. There is that perception, and we have to try to do better.
We do have a question now from the balcony.
Hi, Howard Gardner from Cambridge. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Loud and clear.
Thank you. This is an American question. Of all the developed countries, the United States is by far the most religious. And for many people, truth is religious, and that's the meta and mega story that they tell. How do you think about that issue in trying to nudge a nation toward your views of truth, which are more scientific truth or data-driven truth, when you have religious truth as such a large specter? Thank you.
That's a very good question. I think you could probably answer it better than I can. Well, religious truth is, for these people, the ultimate truth and the ultimate moral guide to their lives, and that's to be respected. Now, how you square those religious beliefs with the behavior of Donald J. Trump, if you are both very religious and a fervent supporter of that man, that is more difficult for me to understand. I think the only way to understand it is that human behavior is not logical. We all know that. We are not logical beings. We are driven by impulses, urges. We are rational in some part of our mind, and I mean, Freud, right? I mean, there are different things going on at different levels of our consciousness. So, in any event, yes, that is a peculiarity, if you like, of American society, and it plays a big role. Again, why somebody who has strong religious beliefs, and therefore a strong moral code. I mean, people. I think anybody who's secular has at times wished that he or she was, had this epiphany, and then the road ahead is clear. I mean, it's very clear, how to behave and within what moral and religious framework. So, Donald Trump holding the Bible upside down, outside that church, I mean, that's the thing, Donald Trump could not shoot an elk if it was standing 20 yards from him on Fifth Avenue. I mean, he would have no idea. And yet, all these people who do shoot elk regularly, and some of them, store it in frozen form for the Armageddon they believe is coming. They think he's wonderful. So there we are. Life's a mystery.
The last question for this discussion, Professor King.
Desmond King, you've seen me recently on the platform, sorry.
I remember it.
Thank you very much for the talk and for all your reporting over the years. It's very, very important. I want to agree with you and then raise a challenge and ask a question. I agree with you that we've seen in the last 2.5 decades a remarkable change. We have in Sweden, France, Italy, and some other European countries parties that are in power or influencing power, which were considered pariahs 20 years ago. It's a remarkable change, which is, I think, underlining your concerns. I do wonder if we can point to some institutional factors and reasons for it, though. In the US case, I would say Citizens United is a crucial moment that we need to know about. And the way that the primaries have come to operate is an obvious institutional source of what comes out of the presidential candidacy level. So
you're talking about money, essentially. Right?
Well, money and how the primaries operate and how you can get away with saying things in the primaries in a way that you can't in other forum. And I also think the 2008 crisis, which you highlighted, is much bigger in its consequences than we really appreciate. But it's.
Are you saying my speech was too short?
Short. Yes. But my last question is how to get the facts across. Brexit. Yeah. One of the key things amongst the Brexiteers was to say Turkey is about to join the EU. The Prime Minister at the time,
I think
Cameron,
that was a lie, right?
A total lie. Cameron at the time had to correct the minister who said that in his cabinet and said, this is nonsense, that cannot happen, no effect. Right. In the recent election, one of the candidates saying that said it again and was corrected again to say that, and as you know, Turkey hasn't joined the EU since 2016.
And all those hundreds of millions coming to the NHS.
So how do you get that fact? That fact has been restated many times, but without a perceptible effect, I think. Thank you.
Well, as I said, there's such a bombardment these days that, I mean, when I was writing my column during the Trump years, part of the game is to make your head spin, I think. I mean, that's part of Trump's thing. He says he's going to buy Greenland, and then then he says he wants to prosecute women who have an abortion, and then he says, it just goes at such a speed. I think social media, perhaps should have been highlighted more. I mean, the fact that these things. And now with Musk, Twitter is degenerating very quickly into this very, very ugly thing, and these threats he's putting out. I mean, he repeated, he repeated a conspiracy theory about the attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband from a website that claims that Hillary Clinton died during the 2016 campaign and has been replaced by some other thing. And you know, this is Elon Musk, the richest man on the planet, who is quoting from this kind of source. So, you know, that's what I mean. You know, and you know, that's what I mean about the dangers of a society where, as you said, I mean, something that is false is said, it is disproved, it is denied, it's a lie, but it has a life of its own, and you know, it's you know, that's what I was trying to talk about, and we'll see what happens in 2024. As I said, I don't think Donald Trump is going to be re-elected. I hope I'm right. I love this country, and I believe in its future, maybe because I'm a newly minted or relatively newly minted American, and the world needs the United States. We do not want to live in a world run by China and Russia. Thank you.
Thank you so much.